Hello, everybody. Hopefully, you can hear me. And this is just a quick re recording, so to speak. So, just a new recording because I could not seem to, either I probably did not record it on what we did for the laboratory on last Monday. I'll send you everybody an email. We're going to be lecture type laboratory because I've got to do something with the blood unit as well, and we'll probably do some EKGs, and then we'll do the blood lab on, let me see, we'll do the blood lab a week from Monday, whatever date that is. So it'll be the 19th, it'll be the 26th. Well, lovely, my daughter's birthday. Just, so here's the quick for if you were not here or if you were here and you're just hearing it again, that's fine. This all has to do with that, the pacemaker cells and pacemaker potential. So basically, first we want to look at what it means. This is with regard to the action potentials are different because these cells do not contract, but it's all about their electrical activity, and they're part of this intrinsic cardiac conducting system. Again, the SA node, the AV node, the bundle of His or AV bundle, which again is the only connection between the ventricles and the atria themselves, and all of that. So, what does it mean to have pacemaker potential? Okay, because even though the potassium channels are closed that reset the cell or theoretically have reset the cell, there are slow sodium channels that are continuously open. So as you can see, and you'll see graphically, even though it reaches its bottom, its resting membrane potential, it immediately starts to leak sodium, okay, into the cell, and that it continually begins it to go rise toward threshold at a fixed rate. And so once it reaches threshold, where most systems we look at are sodium potassium based, this one's more calcium based. And again, it underscores the importance of calcium in the physiological aspect, not only of all muscles, whether it's smooth muscle, a cardiac muscle, skeletal muscle. And again, here, what we're seeing mostly the important aspects of this probably have a fair amount more to do with extracellular than the intracellular calcium levels we were so familiar with in the skeletal muscle system, and extracellular, even though again there's some in smooth involving intracellular, again it's mostly extracellular, and then repolarization goes back to potassium. There's the graph that we looked at before, and you can see it here. Oops, pardon me, going backwards. So immediately it reaches its bottom, quote unquote, resting membrane potential, immediately, and you can see the rate is fixed and continuous. The action potential is different. Okay. The calcium, it's not quite that sharp up with sodium, down with potassium that we saw in nervous system and skeletal muscle. This is much more of a plateau kind of phenomena by design. So that's one thing worth noting. This is the sequence, and we've talked about it a couple of times. SA node, and again, we're talking less than a quarter of a second. SA node to AV bundle, then branching right and left, and then finally, basically taking that signal rapidly through the AV bundle and the bundle branches down to that subendocardial conducting network by way of the Purkinje fibers. And those Purkinje fibers really are at the apex, the tip, in that lower left sort of area, almost at the tip of the left ventricle, and they immediately go up in that unique way of sort of squeezing it out from the bottom up, if you want to think of it that way, in any one of analogy. So the SA node, right atrial wall, it's and whichever one is going the fastest is going to govern the process. So normally this is what's, when we talk about a sinus rhythm, it means this is what's initiating the beat or the sequencing of the heart. Again, your parasympathetic system, which we discussed previously, acts as a governor and holds your heart rate in check, and that's a very good measure of your overall health. And so that pacemaker, when the SA node fires, it's all about the atria and getting to the AV node. And the AV node is sort of the rate determining step from a chemistry perspective. That is the slowest part. It has the least of those voltage gated channels by design. And what that allows it to do is allows the atria, which take a fairly substantial amount of time. If this is 0.22, we're looking at somewhere between 0.10 to maybe 0.20 being associated with atrial contractions and atrial systole. So again, by design, it's designed to top off the ventricles so they're maximally filled. And because once they start to fire, it goes very, very rapidly, as you will see. The inferior interatrial septum is where we notice the AV node. And it has, as you can see, there's a program delay. It goes through the AV, the SA node fairly quick, but that AV node, again, smaller and fewer gap junctions, atrial contraction prior to ventricular contraction. Again, just to reinforce the point, and I know I beat on it a lot, the idea is that systole and diastole are mechanical events. Depolarization and repolarization are electrical events. Electrical events always precede mechanical events. And yes, this could take over in the SA. If the absence of SA node, it would be very difficult to function. You could survive, but not function. And that's where pacemakers have come in over time. And then once it gets through that AV node, the bundle is there. And again, the only connection, bundle branches, Purkinje fibers, which, yes, have their own pacemaker potential, but unfortunately more elaborate on the left, as you might guess. But you can see 30 times a minute is not going to sustain life. It's just not. Eventually, that's doomed to failure. So you can see it here, and we'll look at it. There it is schematically, and you can go over these just as easily as I can read them to you, so I'm not going to, but it's a very good illustration of what kind of goes on. Not, it's just illustrative of anything else. And any irregularities in this system we refer to as arrhythmias. And it means that the coordinated pattern is no longer there. The worst ones are fibrillation. Because they're so rapid, it doesn't allow for adequate filling, whether it's atrial or ventricular. Atrial fibrillation, if it's not addressed, will lead to ventricular fibrillation. Those are rhythms that specifically must be defibrillated in order to resume useful pumping of the blood. So it doesn't matter which one is there. VFib is immediately life-threatening, and AFib will shortly be life-threatening. And again, those AED devices, automatic electronic defibrillators, have really changed our approach. So, it's wonderful studies. I probably told you, same thing with CPR. Most of this started out in the state of Washington, where they started looking at witnessed arrests and starting CPR. And I'm sure I told you 5 to 15%. Even a witness press would survive. 85, 95% of the people survive, but not 5 to 15%. But the AED has reduced that number significantly to maybe 1 to 5%. Sometimes the heart attack is just so massive. It doesn't matter whether you defibrillate or get there. For any of you going into a medical field, rule number 1, people die. Rule number 2, wherever you are in the medical field, doctor, nurse, physician's assistant, nurse practitioner, technician, whatever you're doing, you can't change rule number 1. And it's a very difficult one, because and that's where you'll hear me reiterate over the time in physiology, words like treatable and manageable are very important today, because a lot of things are not curable. So anytime the ectopic focus is the same as the junctional rhythm, where the AV node takes over, and periodically we see extrasystolic beats, little areas of the heart triggering that impulse before the SA node can. These irregularities, surely caffeine and nicotine are the most common causes, but when they become, and I commented that to you, that I had this problem, and it took a while to go away, even after I had stopped smoking. I do ingest a lot of caffeine, comparatively speaking. So when we talk about it, there's the varying kinds of heart blocks, and I'll show you the illustration again. If it's delayed, but you still see the normal sequence of we were going to see the waves P, Q, R, S, and T every time. Then the slowing down is what we call a primary or first degree heart block. If we see not every beat getting through, then it's secondary. And if nothing gets through and we get that junctional rhythm, now it's tertiary. So I don't know that they use those terms that much anymore. But again, from a test perspective, or people ask you about it, it's great to file these things away in your mind. Because if you, again, when people are firing questions on you on a medical floor, whatever your role is, it's good to know the answer. Sometimes, like I said, you make you look like a hero. And then we have the artificial pacemaker. So again, acceleratory is sympathetic and inhibitory is parasympathetic. I'm not going into all the details. Again, the sympathetic is not just rate of contraction, but also not force of contraction, rather, but also heart rate, where parasympathetic is only heart rate. There's the difference between what's called chronotropic and inotropic. And so you know what it is now. What's involved now? We're looking at the muscle action potential. It's different. Okay. So, and this, once that electrical signal comes through, it contacts fast and is sufficient to reach threshold, obviously, fast voltage gated sodium channels. So sodium starts it, and you can see it's a rapid flip. That's, 1.2, roughly 120 millivolts, pretty aggressive. Okay. Then you get slow calcium channels. So the sodium channels close, but the slow calcium channels remain open. And then we get another one of these plateaus. That's that sustained contraction to eject the blood. So the first one we started at the SA node, we're talking about make sure that there's adequate stimulus to fill. This one is all about pretty much ventricularly speaking, ejecting the blood. Okay, and to a certain extent, atrial as well, of course. So after about 200 milliseconds, those channels close, and now the potassium channels open. That's relatively rapid compared to the calcium channels, significantly so. And calcium is pumped both back into sarcoplasmic reticulum because there is some intracellular calcium, but a lot of it is just pumped back out into the extracellular space. And again, that's why there's this overlap in what I take for my blood pressure, and I've not taken today, the calcium channel blockers. So these are the differences. Skeletal, very rapid. Cardiac, comparatively slow. That's there. Sustained contraction, efficient, and Lincoln feels that he wants me to emphasize the point. And again, we can't see tetany. So again, we're looking at this. This is the action potential. This is the tension and then eventually the relaxation. So this is mechanical. Okay. Going from systole to diastole at rest. And then we see depolarization extraordinarily rapid, but a plateau. And then repolarization. Notice it lays flat. Thank you, Pooch. Thank you, Pooch, for making me look bad. We did the EKG nuggets. I don't think it'll be that disturbing. He's just seeing a dog outside. And I call them EKGs. You can call them ECGs. And I showed you a little bit about the 12 lead. That's what we look at. I don't go EKG crazy in this other than the basics for you. I'm not expecting to show you some, irregular Q waves all of a sudden, and you have to tell me specifically, oh, that's a myocardial infarction in the left, in the substantial portion of the left ventricle. Now, that's medical school, graduate school. That's where you do that stuff. This is more, we're looking at it. So the 12 lead, the beauty of the 12 lead is it's able to take, and you remember I told you all about those triangles that effectively, and I'll go back to the ECG library. So again, you have the limb leads, right arm, right leg, left leg, and effectively by picking two of those and another as a ground, we can create 6 different triangles. And depending on which ones are active, that's what you'll see lead 1, lead 2, lead 3, AVR, AVL, and AVF when we get to it. And I'll go back and show you the ECGlibrary.com, which is just a great, easy reference for that. So feel free to take a look at that. It helps. And heck, if you're going into a medical field and you need a quick tutor job on that, that's perfectly useful. You might be able to match it up. Okay. And it talks about the axis of the heart, and that's what you determine. So it's a quick diagnostic way to eliminate some things, or at least focus your attention. It's not all just heart attack. Are we dealing with a lung problem? Is this emphysema? Is this some irregularity? Is this some unusual syndrome? Did I put the leads on right? All of that type of stuff. Why it's so important. So you can see it, and you should know the waves by now. And if you don't, learn them. P wave, again, these are electrical. Depolarization of the SA node in the atria. QRS, ventricular depolarization. It obscures the atrial repolarization. You can't see that because this is so large. The T wave, ventricular repolarization. The atria is no longer in the game right now until the next go round. The PR interval, very important because if that's elongated, that's where we look for heart block. From the start of the P to the start of the R. ST segment, we want to see how well the ventricle depolarizes, and almost by expressing it, is there going to be problems with repolarization? So when that does not appear as it does, as you will see on the normal tracing, then the suspicion is, wait a minute, we've got an issue here. There's some ventricular damage one way or the other. And what does that point to? Previous current, heart attack now, current, and then being able to utilize this. And for years, we utilized this because we didn't have the beauty of looking at serum troponin levels, which were cardiac troponin in the bloodstream, which immediately told you if they were in the bloodstream, then there was damage to cardiac muscle, period. And that only happens with a heart attack. And again, depending on the severity of a heart attack, of a myocardial infarction, remember the name, myocardial, heart muscle infarction, death of tissue from lack of blood supply, period. So if something died, it's never going to be 100% again, just not. If it happens, and, heaven forbid it happens to me, nearly 73 years old, and did I go from 100 to 99? I don't think it's going to adversely affect me that much. I might have a lot of pain, and I might have to all of a sudden get a very large lecture from my doctor, and more importantly, from my wife. Okay. So we take a look at all of these. That's what it looks like. And here you can see the PR interval, start of the P wave to the start of the Q. Q usually, and this typically lead 1 or lead 2. Q usually goes down, R usually shoots straight up. So if it's wide, that's also a problem. Okay, if you have a larger, time for the ventricles to fire, there's clearly ventricular damage. If it's excessively high, then you're talking about, we talked about that a little bit in CLAB, cardiomyopathy. I beg your pardon, enlarged heart, cardiomegaly, which means enlarged heart. If we see if this ST segment either starts up here or it doesn't level out and comes from down here up, then you have real problems. That's really suggesting ventricular irregularities and damage. And they're just showing it to you. I just want to go along with it. So that's what we look for. R waves, again, enlarged ventricles with an enlarged heart. Elevated or depressed STs usually point to blood supply issues and very often to damage. QT intervals, repolarization abnormality, again, you begin to look at that. Maybe again, if that's too wide, like I said, now we're starting to see some significant areas that might be down the road and arrhythmia could develop. And so what is meant by normal? Normal rate for adults, 60 to 100. Not taking into account athletes or extraordinary stressful situations, but at rest cardiogram, you're always going to have again, we look at those spikes. I look at the R wave. You count the little squares. Each one of those represents 0.04 seconds because we trace this paper at 25 millimeters per second. Each one of these is a millimeter. So you're looking for something to be in that, it could be 15, would be a little rapid, but not terribly so. 15, maybe all the way up to 25, that'd be fine in that area. And P wave, QRS, T wave. P wave, QRS, T wave. So really, once this has occurred, once that's fired, you have plenty of time for the heart to be at rest. That's perfectly normal. So that's a normal rhythm, means P wave followed by a QRS and T wave, and once again, and that's a big part. That's sinus rhythm, and the normal has to do with the timing thereof. You can see how elongated. So you've got 5 of these big blocks. That means more than a second. It's more than a second. It's slower than 60. And we don't even see any P waves. And we see some irregularity here, this ST abnormality that's coming. immediately that's junctional rhythm. You don't see the P waves. And then they show you the heart block. Why is it second degree? It's every other one. So we call it a 2-to-1, and I've seen 3-to-1 blocks. And you can see not a lot of activity and a lot of irregularity. So immediately, it's a pacemaker looking to happen. And then the very famous VFib, basically just irregular, eccentric, uncoordinated contractions of the ventricles. And that presents problems. So again, systole and diastole, and we look at the cardiac cycle and what's going to go on. And that's really, my dog is right here, okay? What happens? So between contraction and relaxation, we're going to examine this. We're going to look at in earnest on Monday to look at the sort of marry the cycle, marry the heart sounds, marry the events that go on, okay, and be able to look at that. We're going to look at the important ways, and what this is all about. What makes a heart doing well is we want the ventricles to fill. Again, in between beats, the bigger part, the valves, the semilunar valves, aortic and pulmonary, going to where they're from the eject are closed, and the AV valves are open. Mitral and tricuspid are open. It allows it to fill. If everything is working properly, when that coordinates with the start of the P wave and the firing of the SA node. And so we look at the end of diastole, when it starts to fire, we should have filled the heart 80%. And that last 20% is what happens when the atria contract. And then what happens as the ventricles begin to contract, the rising pressure will open the AV valves and simultaneously will slam shut the AV valves, and will close the AV valves, and then if it starts to rise farther, it will open the semilunar valves to allow the blood to eject through the aorta, into the aorta and into the pulmonary trunk. Okay. And so it's roughly about 120. We're going to see this. And then we look at what was the ejection fraction? What's left in the ventricles? Did we inject that 70 of those 120 milliliters? And then we just start all over again, and we'll look at what the dicrotic notch is. That's that rebound phenomena, that trampoline phenomenon in the aortic and pulmonary vessels, and even to a certain extent subclavian and carotid arteries, because those are such elastic arteries. And what they do, that rebound, really is the impetus for pushing those semilunar valves, the aortic and pulmonic valves, closed so we can restart the cycle once again. And so this is the chart we're going to look at and start. So one more thing I will show you, just because I'm here up on the diagram. And then again, this is the reference point, which you can see a lot of those things, ecglibrary.com. And again, once you click on that, it's always the same. You can look at normal. This is what they call a 12 lead. 1, 2, and 3, VR, AVR, AVL, AVF. And then these are the different leads, the sensors that are over specific areas. And I'm not educated enough to be able to tell you which is which. And so this is the electrical axis and the history, and it's really worth a look-see. So I'll leave you with this in this brief one, and we'll really look at heart function in detail. We're going to do the tech lab for the EKGs with some volunteers, plural, and then we'll do we'll get ready for the blood lab the following week. Thank you very much, and talk to you soon. Goodbye.